This is CBC Here and Now.
Being a former victim of abuse, I think it needs to be clear what women need to do when they're faced with abusive situations.
The likelihood of contracting COVID is far lesser probably than the abuse you're suffering at home.
Tonight, support for victims of domestic violence, where to go to escape an abusive relationship. Good evening, I'm CAROLYN Stokes. Tonight, we're talking about domestic violence during this pandemic. There are renewed calls for the Minister of the Status of Women to speak to the province at the daily COVID-19 briefings. Women's groups have been calling for Caroline Haley to appear at the briefings to address concerns over heightened rates of domestic violence. Now, the opposition is asking government to not only talk more about that issue at the briefings, but to also reopen the House of Assembly to debate it. Haley did do an interview with CBC yesterday and says she doesn't think it's necessary for her to appear at the daily briefings, but there have been guests before, including the Minister of Education, to answer questions about the school system.
I've answered quite a few questions on violence and women's issues and the Office of the Status of Women in our province. There's been quite a few messages that I've put out there, just like I would have, on education and tourism.
I don't think the public needs to see a different minister every day. Premier Ball has spoken several times during the media availability, particularly about domestic violence.
Well, the minister responsible for the status of women says she doesn't have to show up at the daily briefings during this crisis, but that has raised some issues of concern about women's issues. Joining me now is JERMAINE Manning. So JERMAINE, during this pandemic, what strikes you as being important for women who are in abusive relationships?
Being a former victim of abuse, I think it needs to be clear what women need to do when they're faced with abusive situations. And right now, we're not seeing that from our minister. And I think our Minister for the Status of Women is in a good position to be very public about this serious issue. A lot of women who are trapped in these situations right now, they're not sure what to do. We see that these daily conferences, they're helping. People are doing what they're supposed to be doing. We have flattened our curve almost to 0 cases. And if our minister was more vocal with what women in vulnerable positions can do right now, I think we would see a decrease in the violence that we are seeing right now, because we know nationally this is an issue. We see in Toronto I think it's a third, or the cases have gone up by like a 30% or something like that. We know that within our own provinces, cases have gone up drastically as well. So if we know this, why are we not doing anything about this?
During a pandemic like this, people are stuck at home. We can see that people are losing their jobs. The economy's in trouble. What concerns do you have of what this means for women who might not be in the best of relationships?
I know that when you're financially dependent on somebody else, that can be an issue that keeps you in that relationship if you cannot afford to be without that other person at this time. Also, I see it as a vulnerable position right now for women to be in when they're dealing with husbands who may have traditionally provided for their families, and right now, whether they've lost their job or whatever other reason due to this pandemic, they're not able to do what they've normally done, so that might be hard on the men as well. But those men need to be reminded that that doesn't justify abuse of any kind. It doesn't make this acceptable no matter what's going on, that any abuse towards women will not be tolerated.
Is there a different dynamic in different communities in Labrador that makes the issue of domestic violence against women different in the Big Land?
Well, we don't have the same resources that you see down here on the Avalon, and I think being a person now that lives on the Avalon, you do get into that mindset that you take advantage of what you have around you, not realizing that people in other parts of the province, particularly in northern Labrador, they don't have those resources. I know where I'm from in Makkovik, we don't even have a safe house, as well as there's a couple other communities in Nunatsiavut that don't have safe houses for women to go to if they're experiencing any type of abuse at home.
Well, let's address some of the concerns that JERMAINE has raised. Michelle Green is the executive director here at Iris KIRBY House. So Michelle, if a woman is thinking, should I stay home and be in an abusive relationship or take my chances getting COVID-19, what can you tell them? What's available?
So there's a variety of services available. At Iris KIRBY House here in St. John's, we have 7 isolation units, so people can socially isolate until the 14 days has passed. We also run a shelter in Carbonear. the same principles hold there. You are not going to have any increased risk of getting COVID coming to a transition house than you will if you're living in your own house and doing your regular duties. We have lots of PPE on hand. There's no shortage of that. The government has, through Newfoundland Labrador Housing, provided us with that. I know that the other transition houses across the province, Marystown, Gander, Corner Brook, Lab City, Goose Bay, and the ones on the coast, all have very similar practices in place. So the likelihood of contracting COVID is far lesser probably than the abuse you're suffering at home. So there is capacity. There's telephone capacity. You can also email us for support at iriskirbyhouse.ca, and we will get back to you. We will, if you don't want to come to the shelter, there's also other safety plans we can help you put in place. The government does have some capacity at some hotel as well. So there's lots of ways, but the most important thing is to reach out. And any of the shelters across the province have capacity. And we are concerned that our numbers are down because we know people are experiencing abuse, probably at higher levels, but people are afraid to reach out. So we want to let people know that it is very safe. All the transition houses in the province have very safe protocols in place, and we have capacity. We can absolutely keep people safe. That's what Iris Kirby House has been doing for 40 years come next year. So it's our job to keep people safe, and we're really good at it. And when it comes to domestic violence, you don't have to stay home. You can make a choice too, and if you don't feel safe, you can call and find out what resources are available. But if you're afraid to come because of COVID, let us tell you what it looks like. Don't make the assumption that you know.
Now let's talk about the local economy, and we'll start at the airport. Passenger traffic is down by 97% at the major airports in Atlantic Canada. And as Terry Roberts reports, that's having a devastating effect on St. John's Airport and the businesses that operate there.
This airport is a transportation hub, welcoming 1.5 million passengers most years. Annual revenues of nearly $50 million. But that was before COVID-19.
I guess catastrophic is the best word.
What would normally be 40 daily flights reduced to just 5, and plenty of empty seats on those planes.
Well, it's certainly like nothing I've ever experienced in my 15 years at the airport. It's a little surreal, actually. It's more like a ghost town than it is an airport right now.
We had to make the decision, and we had to make it quick.
Most businesses that normally serve passengers temporarily closed 2 months ago, including this restaurant that just opened in September.
The future is definitely unknown, but I have to be optimistic because we've put a lot of money into that location.
Michelle Pye operates 3 Freshie locations in the city. Only 2 are operating, takeout and delivery only, with just a handful of her 50 staff working.
I work closely with the airport authority, and they have been actually amazing and really flexible to make sure that our business is hopefully going to survive.
Just 5,400 passengers flowed through the sprawling terminal last month, just a fraction of the nearly 120,000 for the same month last year.
We haven't seen passenger traffic levels projected to be this low by the end of this year since, in the last quarter century, really.
Which means the airport is poised to lose tens of millions in revenue.
Our best case, our revenues will be down by 2/3 for the airport, and in our worst case, if we see the travel restrictions or a second wave of COVID, our revenues could be down by 75%.
Despite the collapse in travel, the airport is still open and must maintain the highest levels of safety and security, fixed costs that cannot be cut. And with revenue dried up, the airport is borrowing in order to stay afloat. There are big questions about what the travel industry will look like in the future. But for now, experts can only guess.
We're still running those models to see what the survivability of our airport looks like.
Terry Roberts, CBC News, St. John's.
Well, it's been 2 weeks straight without any new cases of COVID-19 in this province, and there are only 4 active cases of the illness right now, and only one of those is in the community. But we still have another 2.5 weeks to go before the province reaches the next level of reopenings. That should happen on June 8th when we hit alert level 3. We'll start seeing more businesses reopen with restrictions like restaurants, shopping malls, and hair salons. But some provinces, even those with far more cases of COVID-19 than here, are already reopening those businesses and restarting their economies. The Canadian Federation of Independent Business compared the percentage of businesses reopening in each province, and Newfoundland and Labrador is in last place. In Alberta, 47% of businesses have reopened. In both Manitoba and New Brunswick, 44% of businesses have reopened. But in this province, only 22% of businesses have reopened. The CFIB represents about 2,000 businesses in this province. Joining me now is the Provincial Affairs Director for the local CFIB, VAUGHN Hammond. So, Mr. Hammond, what have you been hearing from local business owners about how this province is handling the reopening plan compared to other provinces?
Until recently, we've been hearing that business owners appreciate that the public health measures had to be into effect. But given the recent good news in that there are now, two weeks of no new cases and a low number of active cases, they're starting to question why those public health measures are, well, even the alert levels, why they're not able to go back to work at this point.
Well, the chief medical officer says the province has a low number of cases because of the cautious approach that we've been taking, and that reopening now could risk a second wave. What do you think about that?
I think what we have to recognize is that the public health measures have been effective and obviously successful. But what we need to now consider is how we can operate our economy within those public health measures.
So the survey the CFIB released today was discussed a lot at today's COVID-19 briefing. The Premier and health officials basically say it's too much of a risk to reopen now, despite the low number of cases. Just have a listen to what the Premier said earlier today.
Yeah, of course, we want to get our business community, want to get people back working. But if we don't do it safely and don't do it with a plan, making sure that we can respond to a flare-up, if indeed that should happen again, well, then that would only have more impacts and would not do much for business confidence in Newfoundland and Labrador.
So what do you make of that? Do you think that if businesses did reopen now, reopened early, and there was a flare-up, could that make it worse for businesses?
I think certainly if there was an outbreak that occurred similar to what happened in March and the government had to issue mandated close orders, that would certainly have an effect. However, what I would argue is that on a daily basis, the Premier, the Minister of Health and Community Services, and the Chief Medical Officer of Health have said that COVID-19 is not going away. It's in our community. And so the possibility is always going to exist until there's some sort of treatment or whatever else may happen with it, that we're going to have to deal with COVID-19. It's going to be a consistent and constant threat. So what we need to understand from our government officials, and particularly from our elected government officials, is how do we maintain the public health measures but yet operate within those public health measures.
Are you hearing from businesses who are looking at your survey, who are looking at other provinces like, say, Alberta? They have about 1,000 active cases of COVID-19 there right now, but you can still go out and get a haircut. Are the businesses you're talking to looking at those other provinces and saying, how come we can't just do the same thing?
Absolutely. Our members are very much aware of what's going on in other jurisdictions within their particular areas of business. They know what other provinces are doing. They know where and what's available. So yes, they are looking at other jurisdictions and they are wondering, given our numbers on the public health side, why is it that they can't operate a little bit more freely than what they currently are?
All right, VAUGHN Hammond, thank you so much for speaking with us about this today.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for your time.
Well, let's talk more about this. Let's bring in here now is Meg Roberts, who's standing by live in the newsroom. So, Meg, what are officials saying about this?
Well, Carolyn, they're defending that plan today. As you mentioned, it's been exactly 2 weeks without a single new COVID-19 case in the province, and there's still more than 2 weeks to go until the next level of reopening starts. Now, provinces like PEI and New Brunswick, who have also gone long stretches without cases, are reopening a number of businesses and services tomorrow. PEI is also looking at moving up its next phase by 2 weeks. And provinces who aren't doing as well with COVID numbers have already started reopening some businesses as well. For example, in many provinces, you can now get a haircut. But the message from officials today is it's too soon for Newfoundland and Labrador to ease restrictions.
Our plan is quite different. Many provinces have been at various stages. So I've seen over my 30-odd years in business too, it's not always those that get to the start line and get off to a fast start that actually finish the race. So, for us, it's making sure that we put the proper plans in place. We work very closely with our business community. We are doing that.
The province's chief medical officer of health says they are not consider reopening any earlier than June 8th. That date is the alert level 3, and which is if it all went well, that's when restaurants, hair salons, retail stores, those could reopen. Now, Health Minister John HAGGIE says considering the province's demographic, it's an appropriate timeline.
Given the fact that we have a very elderly population compared with other jurisdictions, we have some of the highest incidences of other chronic diseases, particularly diabetes. We've got 11% of our population who are diabetic. If you add those facts together, 28 days is a reasonable period to make sure, from a provincial point of view, you're as good as you can be.
As of today, there are 4 active cases in the province. 3 of them are in hospital. Carolyn.
Meg, that's here now's Meg Roberts reporting live. Well, now let's go to the healthcare system. The backlog of canceled medical appointments, surgeries, and hospital procedures due to the pandemic is massive. Here now's Heather Gillis reports.
Thousands of people waiting for specialist appointments, surgeries, and other procedures at Eastern Health will have to wait even longer. 11,500 specialist appointments were canceled in a 7-week period spanning March and April due to the pandemic. Nearly 4,000 fewer surgeries happened over the same 7 weeks compared to the year before. And the list goes on. 37,000 canceled medical imaging appointments, 2,100 fewer endoscopies, and 47 fewer cardiac diagnostic procedures. Eastern Health calls the situation extremely challenging.
Rather than clearing the backlog, we're trying to get ourselves up to as close to normal operations as we can.
But while the hospitals operate at a reduced capacity, the backlog is expected to grow.
And our job is to slow the growth of that wait list.
Why not get me in and get me out?
It means people like Andrea Squires, who's waiting for bladder surgery, will have to wait even longer.
And it's basically ruining my life. I can't go out anywhere. My anxiety level is high. I basically force myself to use the bathroom. But sometimes I just use the bathroom and I don't even know I'm doing it. And that's no life to live.
For Mark Squires, a surgery and a specialist appointment were canceled.
Mobility was really, really tough, and I couldn't get around.
Eastern Health says the most urgent patients will be seen first as they prepare to see more in line with the province's alert level system. However, they say things won't go back to normal anytime soon as the province prepares for a second wave of coronavirus infections later this year. Heather Gillis, CBC News, St. John's.
Weather update is brought to you by the Healthcare Foundation Home Lottery. Bonus deadline is midnight Friday, June 12th. Order tickets now at hcfhomelottery.ca.
Well, this is the type of day that we've been waiting for all spring, although it's quite breezy, an absolutely gorgeous day across the board, and we actually hit a milestone. We've recorded a 20-degree temperature through parts of the province. Let's take a look at where that was. It was Terra Nova first at 2:30 this afternoon, reached a high near 20.4 degrees, and then we saw a high near in Gander near 20.2 degrees, and you reached that around 3:30 this afternoon. Now, temperatures right across the board, absolutely gorgeous. 16 degrees in St. John's, 19 in Corner Brook. You're barely there towards the 20-degree mark, but it is absolutely beautiful. Another 17-degree day up through Happy Valley, Goose Bay as well. As you can see, we did see some cloud cover earlier today in the east. That's since moved off, and then we do have some more cloud cover moving in for southwest and then up through Labrador, and that's because we're going to see some showers move in as we head through the overnight tonight, and these winds are going to stay breezy as well. So anywhere from 50 to as much as 70 km/h winds. There's that shower activity I was talking about, and then that cooler air will move in up through Labrador. So potentially, or more than likely, will mix with some flurries overnight tonight, and then those showers will make their way further east as we head into the early morning hours. And unfortunately, that potential for showers is pretty much going to stick around through the day tomorrow, and windy conditions as well. Anywhere from 40 to as much as 70 km/h winds expected again. And with those cooler temperatures up through Labrador, even northern peninsula, you're probably going to see some snow in the mix through the afternoon. And then take a look at what happens as we head into the evening hours. We're going to go from 15 to 16 degrees, much cooler, and then that means don't be surprised to see some flakes flying for the northeast and even here in the metro area as well through the overnight on Friday. So taking a look at temperatures tomorrow, we're going to hang on to the warmth-ish for the eastern areas, 11 to 14 degrees. And then that cooler air up through Labrador sinking towards the northern peninsula, and about 10 degrees colder for you on the west coast, only reaching a high near 8 degrees for Corner Brook. And then as we head into the day on Saturday, temperatures are going to rebound up through Labrador, but going to stay on the cool side again, back down into those single digits for most of the island. Marystown, you'll probably stick around those double digits as well. Taking a look at the 5-day forecast, temperatures will be climbing as we head into the beginning of next week. Look at your overnight lows by Tuesday night. Double digits, which is great news. And then for western and central Newfoundland, you're looking at temperatures in the teens to start off the week, but unfortunately going to be a little bit unsettled into Tuesday. And then for Labrador, same thing. Look at that, 18 degrees on Monday for eastern Labrador. Just wanted to share this great shot of the sunset from Topsail Bluff. Thank you to Bonnie for sending that in. And if you have any weather photos to share with us, send them to nlphotos@cbc.ca.
Congratulations, Gander Collegiate. Encore une fois, félicitations.
Well, that's a message from the Prime Minister to the graduating class at Gander Collegiate. Because of COVID-19, the grad celebrations have been pretty different this year. There was no grad night, but students found other ways to celebrate from a distance and received these words of encouragement.
Hello, Concords. I just wanted to say congratulations to the class of 2020. I know you're all disappointed that prom and grad were canceled, but I want you to take a moment to reflect on what you've accomplished.
Well, keep the fancy hats and fascinators in storage for another year. The Lieutenant Governor's annual garden party has been canceled this summer because of COVID-19. The party is held each year on the third Wednesday of July on the grounds of Government House in St. John's, a tradition that goes back to 1831. This year's event won't go ahead because large public gatherings aren't allowed under the public health guidelines, but the grounds of Government House are open to the public at this time, and people are encouraged to enjoy them while maintaining proper physical distancing, of course. Well, thanks so much for spending part of your evening with us. Coming up next is Power and Politics. Good night.